Mandalay Entertainment Group is having significant box office success, including a Golden Globe, as well as 4 Oscar nominations for the film The Kids Are All Right. The force behind this Hollywood studio, Peter Guber. As founder and CEO of Mandalay Entertainment, his company has brought in $3 billion worldwide. He was previously chairman and CEO of Sony Pictures Entertainment, responsible for Basic Instinct, Sleepless in Seattle, and Philadelphia. But Guber is not just a Hollywood guy. He's also co-owner of the Golden State Warriors NBA's team, and he comes to us now from our studio in LA. So, Peter, I know there are a lot of basketball fans out there, but we have to talk about movies. DreamWorks CEO Jeffrey Katzenberg was speaking today about how the TV and the cable business is on fire, but the movie business is really in a bad place. You've had a long career in this business. How challenged is the movie business right now?
It's very challenged because location-based entertainment, to get butts and seats, people to drive 5.6 miles, wait 20.3 minutes, pay all that money for a movie, it better be really good. And people spend their time even more dearly than they spend their money. And so you have 2 businesses emerging. You have this big tentpole franchise business, big studio business, whether it's a Spider-Man or a Captain America or a Green Lantern or a Batman or a Dark Knight. You have all that business, which is a continuity business, which fuels a global marketplace for these global studios. And then you have this smaller independent films that are generally independently financed and distributed by some of the majors sometimes, but mostly independents, and they're 2 divergent businesses. And that smaller business may be moving more carefully towards a VOD market with a very minimal theatrical approach because it's so expensive to launch a film into the ether today, motion picture theatrical film.
So how do you see the tug of war between the content providers and VOD, Hulu and Netflix? How do you see that evolving?
Well, it's going to be marketplace driven. You have to look at it, I think, in 2 ways. What is the efficiency that you get by going one way, by having a very efficient operation? Theatrical exhibition is not the most efficient operation, even though it's digitally displayed and digitally delivered to most theaters today. It's so expensive for the market film to get marketed. 50, 60, 70, 80, 90, $100 million plus to get the most ordinary of films into the ether. And so the idea of the efficiencies that digital may give you, that VOD may give you, cutting out marketing costs, being more elegant and using the analytics to reach the right audience, are going to be a very big seduction. That may help that business grow because there's still that business there. There's still an audience that wants to see all of those kinds of films. They still want to see Blindside. They still want to see Black Swan. They still want to see Kids Are All Right. They still want to see Soul Surfer. They still want to see those films. But for them to compete in the big theatrical marketplace is generally extremely difficult and inefficient.
Peter, I want to bring in our Bloomberg reporter, John Erlichman, now. He's been looking at the changing dynamics and the whole content distribution side of the business. John?
Thanks a lot, Emily. Peter, it sounds like you're saying you have no problem with smaller films and them being available on demand right away, when they're in the theaters or on demand the same day, having no window. Is that the case? And then on top of that, obviously for the big studios and the big films, there needs to still be a window there. What is that ideal window between the theatrical release and when it's available on demand?
I think for that good question, good high-quality question, we need to bring in Karnak, because Karnak is the only one that can really answer that, how it's going to evolve. You're right. You've set up the question perfectly. The conundrum is, if you let the smaller films cannibalize the whole window opportunity, will that ultimately erode the opportunity to have those separate windows for the big films? The exhibition looks at it as films in theater, butts and seats. They don't really look at the difference between the films. You know, we used to run Lowe's theaters, and the concessions were the great part of our revenue because we didn't share them with anybody. So ultimately, the exhibition piece is also so wary of anything that collapses these windows, that takes the scarcity and the uniqueness of the exhibition circuit and the theatrical exhibition of a film and erodes it by making it more and more available closer and closer. On the other hand, the people that manufacture these films, produce and create these films, recognize that the inefficiency of the system to spend all that money in marketing that doesn't get returned, and the film then goes to a short time later to a window that really is viable, is seduction to maybe cut that cost out of the equation. Right. So this tug is going to go on for quite some time.
So, Peter, when a big studio today sits around the table and thinks about making a movie, they say, look, we've got to get so much more from the box office because DVD sales dried up. When you sit around the table and think about making a movie now, where do you think, what percentage of the pie is going to come from what place? How much could I get from Netflix? How much am I going to get from on demand? Like, what is the breakdown when you're thinking about making a movie?
Well, this is maybe heresy to say this, but when you're making a movie, with a big movie with the studio, they do that. It's, you know, Hollywood operates by the golden rule. He who has the gold makes the rule, and they got the gold, they make the rule. And they figure they run all the, I was in those positions, they run all those models. They look at every one of those, these windows, every one of those sequential markets, the terminal value of the film. They add up every component, and they put that against cost of the film and marketing and make a decision whether to make it or not. That's the way it works in those marketplaces. And so if you're a producer of those films, they can hear the rattle of your begging cup, no matter how good you are waiting for the funds to drop through that system. You don't control it. It's an anathema to anybody because you don't have any control over it. In the marketplace that I'm also in, the independent marketplace making the films, you run a completely different kind of model. All these smaller films, whether it's King's Speech or whether it's Black Swan or whether Kids Are All Right or whether it's Soul Surfer, a film we just put out recently and then went through Sony's faith-based operation to distribute it and sold it internationally. What you do then is you run the independent financing the film, $10, $15, $16 million. One's in the marketplace this past week we just did. You run those numbers and you look at it totally bottom line. You want to be very efficient with allowing that theatrical.
Peter, what about 3D? It hasn't taken off. Will it ever? And if so, when?
You know, it's the old story that it was taken off. Yes, it's taken off. It's taken off. It isn't the shuttle. It isn't the Concorde. It's 3D. And ultimately, you know, it's whether it's 2,000 lines of resolution or 3D, it's the script, the cast, the picture that really counts. 3D is an enhanced viewing experience. What it tells you is this isn't the end of 3D because it's dipped down. It's no longer a novelty, but it is a value. And in certain films, it has to be used as a value. Look, when sound came upon, people just went to the theater to hear the figures on the screen talk. And then the sound had to get better, then it had to be THX. But no one says, let's go down to the AMC theater, I hear it's THX. No, they talk about the film. That's what's happening to 3D. What will happen to 3D, the next iteration, whether it's 3 years or 5 years, believe it or not, will be glassless 3D, no more glasses. At that point, my view is, since you and I see only in 3D, the fact that the film's in 3D has to be in 3D. It must be in 3D. Why? Because that's the way we see things in real life. So the idea is we're going to get there, and that element will work.
Okay, now, Peter, I have to ask you about Rupert Murdoch. What's your take on this whole scandal? Do you think he will step down or that he should?
You know, I like Mr. Murdoch. I've met him when I was at Sony a bunch of times. I think he's built a world-class organization. And when you have a company that's that big, you have to run a big, giant companies to understand when you have a company that's that big, so much of it runs almost on autonomy and automatic pilot. It just does over a long period of time. No person can have their hands on all the levers. Now, what was the culture? Should it have been more disciplined and watching for those things? Perhaps. But he built a phenomenal enterprise. I think he will survive it. I think it will survive. Yes, I don't know what his legacy will be. Yes, I don't know who will be the succession. But the idea is, we can't take any journey to success has a puncture or two. I mean, this guy has had a phenomenal record. Nobody bats at that level all the time. So now what's happened? He has a wart or two, a puncture or two. I think he will survive it, and I think he deserves to survive it.
This may be more than a puncture, but we will, of course, continue to cover it. All right, Peter Guber, founder and CEO of Mandalay Entertainment, thank you so much for your thoughts on the movie industry.